Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lit Chick on a Mighty Blaze. I'm Jenna Paone, and I'm so excited to be here today with Trish Doller to talk about her fabulous new novel, Float Plan. Trish, welcome. How you doing?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be great. We're going to have so much fun.
Thank you so much for being here. We're going to get started first off by just introducing you and introducing the book, and then we'll get into some of the meatier questions.
Okay.
So Trish Doller is an author of books about love, life, and finding your place in the world. A former journalist and radio personality, Trish has written several young adult novels, including the critically acclaimed Something Like Normal, as well as Float Plan, her women's fiction debut. When she's not writing, Trish loves sailing, traveling, and avoiding housework. She lives in Florida with an opinionated herding dog and an ex-pirate, when we're going to talk about that. Find Trish on Twitter and Instagram at Trish Doller. Float Plan, which is out now, is one of Good Morning America's must-read books, one of Oprah Magazine's best and most anticipated romance novels of 2021, and has earned additional accolades from Goodreads, BuzzFeed, Pop Sugar, She Reads, and many more. In a starred review, Publishers Weekly says Doller's expert balance of the sweet and the serious make this touching romance a sure success. And Kirkus says, with humor, love, and skill, Doller shows her heroine surviving a loved one's suicide, something rare in romantic fiction. Booklist says Doller's tale of grief slowly combines with a sparkling travelogue, which gradually becomes a romance and ultimately a wholly satisfying story that may just make readers yearn for their own voyage. Trish, welcome and congratulations on
Thank you.
And before we get started, I do just want to give all of our viewers just a warning, as is in the front of the book, that this book does deal with a death by suicide. And we're just going to post some links in the comments. If you or a loved one is experiencing any sort of troubles and you feel like you need to talk to somebody, please do not hesitate to reach out to Lifeline or Suicide Prevention. Trish, thank you for including such an important topic in your book, which is rare in, it's a rare topic to begin a lighthearted sailing romance.
Right.
But we're going to discuss that. So why don't you tell us just really quickly what Float Plan is about?
So basically, Float Plan is the story of Anna, a young woman who loses her fiance to suicide. And they were meant to go on a sailing trip together through the Caribbean. And after his death, she's having difficulty coping and she makes the trip alone. When she gets started, she realizes that she might be a little out of her depth. And so she enlists the help of a former competitive sailor to help her get through. And he helps her get through in more ways than one.
Yes, he does. And he's awesome. We love him. So let's talk for a little bit. Let's talk really briefly about your inspiration for writing this. We were mentioning in our little green room before the interview that you said this book took you a long time to write. Can you tell us a little bit about where the idea for this book came and what that years-long process was like for writing this?
It started out as a young adult novel about 8 years ago. It wasn't anything like this at all. It was literally there were some similar elements. There was a main character who was a teenage girl whose boyfriend had died in a motorcycle accident, and no one knew that he was her boyfriend. So it was kind of, that was going to be the story. And in her grief, which she couldn't really share with anyone because no one actually knew, her mom sends her to Florida to stay with her grandmother. And while she's there, her grandmother has this college guy named Keen Sullivan staying with her. And he's just not anything like Keen in the book. He's just he's 19. So, think about 19-year-old boys, and he's kind of there. But it wasn't working. The whole story wasn't working like I wanted it to. So I put it away, and I want to say it was probably around the time that Wild came out.
Okay.
The book. I read it and I was just like, I want this book only with sailing. Not memoir, but fiction. So I was like, well, if I can't find that, why don't I write that? So I started working on it, and then I went back and pulled Keen Sullivan because I was trying to figure out who the best love interest from this character would be. And I'm like, okay, what if it was that guy, only older and having had been through his own stuff? Yeah. And so that's kind of how that happened. But I started writing that particular book 6 years ago. And when I finished it, we submitted it and we got no offers on it at all. So I thought, well, it was longer. Mm-hmm. Anna was in college, so it was in a weird spot in terms of, I feel like they, like editors weren't interested in that age group.
College, yeah.
And so when I aged her up and tightened up the book and changed the name, it worked. But it still took me a long time because I was contracted to write young adult novels. And so I had to work on those. And so this was kind of like my side hustle while I was getting those other books written. And finally I hit that point where like the last book finished and we sold this one. So.
And was there anything that was different about this? So in translating it from YA to adult, women's fiction, were there any specific challenges of that? Had you ever written in this genre before? Or had you always kind of stayed in the YA area before then?
Way back when my son was tiny, I was trying to write like historical romance. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't working for me. I wasn't very good at it, but I did kind of already have at least a little bit of personal practice. But really, like the story didn't. The only thing that has to change from this particular book, as from YA to adult, is that they're not going through a coming of age.
Right.
These people are coming through something that they, a trauma, and coming out on the other side of it. And I think that's kind of a universal thing that could happen in YA just as easily as it does in women's fiction. So I didn't want to put an 18-year-old by herself on a boat either. So, I did that in the book before. My last YA novel was about 2 teenage girls on a sailboat together, but it's a little more controlled. So like putting a, 18-year-old out into the universe on a boat alone was not a good plan. So
I'm not sure it's a great idea. I mean, obviously the whole premise of your book is that it's not a great idea for Anna to be out on a boat.
No, it really isn't.
No joke. This is like, we're really talking about dangerous stuff. If you don't know what you're doing, we're going to talk about your sailing history, and you're a very experienced sailor. It's truly a dangerous thing, but let's talk about Anna for a second.
Okay, sure.
Anna is, she's mourning the loss of her fiance. And there's, what I love about this book, the heart of this book is this very feminist love story about really figuring it out for yourself. It's not, yes, there's a romance, but it's really about Anna's journey of like figuring out how to live again. Can you talk for a little bit about how you kind of came up with the character of Anna? Did you always have the ending in mind? We don't want to spoil the ending, but was that always your goal, to tell the love story in this way? And kind of, how did you come up with Anna? Why did you know that she was the right voice for this?
I don't know how I came up with Anna. She just sort of happened. Like I started thinking about, when you put someone on a boat like that, I mean, it's always like the idea was to put someone on a boat.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, who would be the best person to put on the boat? And it wouldn't be someone who's like, I'm an experienced sailor, I'm going to go sail around. I mean, you could put that and have someone sail around the world, but that's an entirely different story.
Yeah.
So I was like, what if she's not okay? What if she's not happy? And what if, she needs to, she needs something. And that's how kind of Anna evolved into this grieving person. That grief can drive you to like want to get away from all of the people who are telling you it's time to get over, it's time to move on. And nobody gets to tell you that. And so she, and she said that, she basically says that. So in order to escape all of those people who are bothering her, she just leaves. And so I knew that that's how I wanted it to be, that I wanted it to be like this, I just have to escape. How can I escape? I'm going to jump on a boat.
Yeah. That's, and Keen is processing his own sort of personal tragedy. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but I think it's safe to say he has a serious injury that affects the rest of his life, and it is very fitting for a sailor. Which, but he, you have this idea throughout the book that grief is cyclical, that grief is not linear, that it's something you return to over and over and over again. And I think that at its core is what, for me really makes the book is that it's this, yes, it is a light romance. It's a fun read. It's an escapist read, but there's so much heart in this story, and it's so emotionally complex and sincere. And I am just curious to hear a little bit more about the process of how you go about, because I think it's really hard to write about hard things in a lighthearted way. I think that's one of the hardest things to do. And I'm curious how you approach that as a writer.
I feel like it's a flip answer, but it's like, this is literally my writing MO. Like, all of my books are like this.
Yeah.
Like, none of them are so serious that, I mean, they all have very serious moments, but they're all like, that's just the way. I don't know, maybe I'm reflecting myself. It's just, there is humor. Humor lives side by side with sadness. So you can't just
100%.
focus on one and not have the other. You have to have those moments where you have this sheer joy or hilarity or crazy things happening, but at the same time, sadness can live right alongside of it and be part of it. So to me, it just felt really natural to add those things together, to have someone having experience like this wonderful moment, like when they see the whales. It's just like this magical moment in the middle of her grief. And, those moments are the ones that push you along and help you move forward as you're grieving. So,
yeah. And ultimately, it's what we're all looking for in our moments of sadness, is this idea that like, there is something beyond this, right? We will reach a point again where something else is possible. And actually, one of the most beautiful moments in the whole book is, it is when Anna kind of thinks about her deceased fiance. His name is Ben, and she's thinking about how she was never able to live, since he died, she has not been able, all she's been doing is surviving. And suddenly she gets this thought of, I might actually be able to live again. I might actually be able to live with this. And that's such an interesting, it's like, it's the moment we want that, but we're also afraid of it.
Right.
And I guess my question on that is just, what is, I guess, to you, the thing that creates resilience, I guess, is sort of the question I'm asking.
Wow.
I think there's so much in your book about that. Like, I think, is that something you think about quite a bit? Is that something that, you've found in your life that you're able to kind of move on because from certain things or evolve because you have a certain perspective? I guess, what's your life philosophy on that? Yeah, we're getting deep. We're getting deep. Right?
I mean, but I do think that I don't know where the resilience comes from. I don't know. I feel like, wow, this is a really hard question, Jenna.
Is that a bad question? We can move on to something else if you want.
No, but I mean, it's just, I just feel like that, like, if you don't, you're gonna drown. You have to find that, that thing that keeps you going. And I don't want to hit another one of those, what do we call them? All of the nautical terms, but yeah, I mean, you have to keep going, and it's like, I don't know how you do it. Like, I don't know, because I'm fortunate that I haven't been in that situation. I haven't lost someone like that, so I don't know how I would react. I might not, like, I can write about it, but maybe that's not how I would respond. Maybe I would have,
I think it's always easier for us to write about things than it is to live through them,
Yeah.
But that's why we read books, right?
Exactly.
experience things in a lighthearted, in a softened way, so we don't have to actually experience it ourselves.
Yeah.
Moving on, we'll move on to something a little more fun, but kind of on the same line. There's this, conception that, like, obviously your book, I love the cover. It's bright, it's happy, it's women's fiction or rom-com or romance. And there's a misconception, and this is why I do this series in general, because there's this misconception that if something is labeled women's fiction, number one, it's always usually just, it features a woman and it's written by a woman and there's some element of, life change or romance. I'm wondering if you have, and it sort of implies that these stories lack depth, and your book does anything but that. I'm wondering if you have any strong feelings about the classification. Are you, kind of proud to wear the women's fiction banner and that
yeah, I don't I guess I don't mind at all. Like, I've talked about the fact that I think it's more women's fiction than romance, because I mean, it does have the romantic elements. It has a romance. It has, a happily ever after, but it doesn't have, it's not super graphic. In the romance is not graphic. It's not the primary focus. So, I mean, if calling it women's fiction helps people understand, that it's, I don't mind writing books, being a woman writing books that center women. I'm good with that. Hopefully men will grab it and read it. If they don't, they don't. Like,
that's okay, because women buy books. Women read books.
Talk about books with other women. So if that drives the sales, I'm perfectly great with that, because, ultimately I probably do primarily write with women in mind. So
that's so great. And speaking of your writing is so clean, self-assured, acerbic. And we talked a little bit before about how you just say things so succinctly. I mean, I am a total overwriter. It takes me 40 pages to say something that I feel like you say in 3 sentences. And I'm just wondering, have you always been like an underwriter? Is that how you think of yourself? And what's your process like for that?
I am one of those people who I start at the beginning of the book and I write to the end. Like, I don't skip around. I hate this. I mean, I don't hate it. I wish that I could do it differently sometimes. I cannot write a fast draft and then go back and edit. I will not leave a chapter or a paragraph or a sentence until it's where I want it to be. So, so I do. I mean, I'd like to say that, oh yeah, I just sit and succinctly write those 3 sentences, but no, sometimes those sentences will take me all day. So it is, my process is very perfectionist and slow. But when you kind of measure it out, if someone's like, well, yeah, I wrote 6 drafts and it took me 8 months. And I'm like, well, I wrote 1 draft and it took me 8 months, so I've just written all my drafts into one.
Yeah, I love that. How long did Float Plan take in that? Like, I know it took many years, but this iteration of Float Plan with Anna and Keen in this, how long would you say it took you to get you to that draft where you felt like this is ready for me to pitch?
I mean, overall, it took me actually a couple of years. When I look from when, like when we stopped trying to sell it in the first iteration, and then I went back and edited it. But I mean, if I condensed it, it probably, into the actual hours that I did, it probably didn't take me more than maybe a couple of months to get it back. Because I mean, I'd already written like an 83,000 word novel. So it was just a matter of going in and finding what was working and, removing the parts that weren't working. And like it was very, very top heavy. Like the front was just way too long. My critique partner told me years ago, she's like, you got too much in the front. And I was just like, no. And she's like, you have too much in the front. You need to start the action sooner. And I disregarded it. And as soon as I made that cut, it worked. So she was right.
And you do start the action immediately. I mean, we are on the boat a few pages in. It
really wasn't like that. The first one had chapters of backstory. So She was right. Kristen, you were right.
And so that's your do you have a group of writing buddies that you, or is this your feedback partner is?
I mean, I do have I do have many different authors that I, it will exchange stuff with, but like she's local to me, and we met after both of our first books were published. And so like we can get together in real life. We retreat together in real life. So I like having her just be my, she's kind of like
your person.
She's my real life person. And then I have, my mostly online critique partner too. So I have two, and they're kind of like this different sides of the same coin. So one is a cheerleader, one is but what if you cut off the front of the book? Whereas the other one, oh, you're doing great, keep writing,
You need both of those, right?
Both of those things. So
yeah. And we're going to do a question from our viewers. This is from Amanda Smiley. Trish, are there any women's fiction lit books that largely inspired Float Plan or that inspire your work in general?
So yes, for books that inspired Float Plan, I actually just mentioned this on Instagram yesterday when I was talking about Catherine Center's book, Happiness for Beginners. And I also mentioned, well, they aren't fiction, but Wild by Cheryl Strayed was really a huge influence, because I was just like I had mentioned, I was like, I want that, but on a boat. And when I couldn't find it, so I read that, and there was a book called Tracks by Robin Davidson, and it's about a woman who basically crosses the Australian outback. And I wouldn't say that it was an inspiration, but it was one of those kinds of things where I was looking for, like, when you're doing this, what's it like? And then Tanya Abbey did a circumnavigation when she was very young, and her book Maiden Voyage was really instrumental in helping me like go through some of the feelings that you're feeling when you're out there in the middle of nowhere by yourself. But when it comes to actual fiction, Catherine Center's Happiness for Beginners was a huge, she was like a touchstone for me. Like I would go back to it and go, okay, this is how this is how you get to the next point. This is how you get to the next point.
I love that. I love using the templates of I actually love hearing you say that. When I mentioned before that I'm a songwriter, and one of the ways I learned to write songs was by listening to songs, breaking them down into what chord progression is this person doing, what are they doing here melodically, and then kind of like figuring out on my own so I love hearing, and I do the same thing with books, like hearing, like I read this and I learned how you move on to the next. That's really cool to know.
Two of my favorite books in terms of craft, like fiction novels that are in terms of craft it's one called Raw Blue by Kirsty Eager, which is one of my absolute favorite books. And I literally, when I was struggling trying to write one of my YA projects, I read that book and I sat down with a notebook and a pen and like wrote down what happened in each chapter, so I could kind of get the balance of like what happened where. And I, when I mentioned to Kirsty, I'm like, I did this with your book and it's so perfectly balanced. And she's like, that was completely accidental. And I'm like, but it's so good. Like she was so good at it. And the other person who I think whose book is a wonderful tool as well as a like great read is Evie Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes.
So good.
I mean, it's written so well. Like the flow and everything is so great.
That's so awesome. So Evie Drake Starts Over, and what was the other one? Just
it's called Raw Blue.
Raw
and
Blue.
Published originally in Australia. I think it's available in the United States. I mean, I don't know. I bought my copies online over from Australia, but I think it is. I think it's available.
I love that. We're going to switch a little bit. And because you briefly touched on, planning out the journey. And I understand that you are actually a very experienced sailor. You and your husband both sail, and you have some plans to do this voyage that Anna and Keen go on. Can you tell us a little bit about your sailing history and your plans?
So I wouldn't use the word very. My husband is the very experienced sailor. His father was a sailor, and so he basically learned to sail immediately when he was born. You know, he took his first steps on a boat, and so everything that I've learned from him. But when I first started sailing was when we were in Ohio. We lived in Ohio, and I would forget everything over the winter. We only sailed in the summer up north. And so by the time summer came back around, he'd be like, grab that line, grab that halyard. And I'm like,
The what?
which one? Which one? Is it this one? And he'd be like, no, it's not that one. It's the red one. And I'd be like, I don't, maybe we could put labels on these so I would know. And so I'm still learning a lot about sailing. And most of the time, like, I don't drive the boat alone. Like, he, you know, at some point I will have to, but it hasn't happened yet. But yes, we bought it. So this is a weird story. When I wrote Float Plan, I asked my husband, what's a really good boat that looks old fashioned and expensive, but isn't?
Yep.
And so he pointed me out to the Allberg, and I put it in the book. And he introduced me to a guy who had one, and he, you know, we talked about it, and I'm like, this sounds like a really nice boat. Like, why don't we think about getting one? And then we did. Like, we had
that a Float Plan bonus purchase? Was that an advanced purchase?
Kind of. Yeah, kind of. We went in on it together. So, but I mean, you know, we're married.
Is it a Float Plan?
No, it's not. It's not. But we bought the boat, but it's a 30-foot boat. And I realized we realized very quickly that it's much, much too small to sail the Caribbean. So we ended up buying just last year, which actually this is the Float Plan boat. It's called a Beneteau 390, and it's very much built for cruising and sailing. And there was a guy in his dad's condo complex that was 91 years old, and he wanted to get rid of it. So we got it we stole it, really, basically. We stole it. They should put us in jail for it. So we're getting it ready. He's doing a lot. We're having the electrical work all redone, and he's making sure all of the safety systems are in place, so then I can go in and fluff it up with pretty things. And
I love it. What's the boat's name? Does it have a name?
So this boat is called Aroha, which it's a Polynesian word that sort of encompasses all of the different forms of love, empathy, sympathy, affection, friendship, romantic love, compassion for the world. And that's kind of like the message that we want to put out into the world when we go out on this boat, that we are people that you can be safe with, that you can trust, that you can know that we're not going to be, you know, the ugly American tourist. We're going to love you back.
Oh, I love that. And we'll talk about, I mean, boat culture is so prevalent in this book. We'll talk a little bit about that, because like there is this whole other world, and we do a bit of boating. My husband and I we actually learned to sail a couple summers ago, because I've been wanting to learn how to sail my whole life. And I really wanted to do it because one of my characters in my novel is a sailor. But there's this whole community there's this whole different world. There's a way you act. There's, you know, it's very, in your first chapter, it's very fitting. Like, you have this moment where Anna comes up upon another boat, and they just do the wave, and like people don't really like that's like boaters code. Like, you have to, like, you must wave. If you don't wave, like, you're going to get like a dirty look. And what are some of the other fun things about boat culture that you've kind of picked up, or that you included in this book?
We haven't really, we haven't experienced it ourselves because we haven't been really far afield yet, but it seems to be a really prevalent thing that when a bunch of boats are anchored in a harbor somewhere, that they will all get together and drink, you know, have a drink at sundown. And, you know, like, they even just call it, come on over for a sundowner. Well, we haven't actually done that with anybody yet, but, you know, it's like when Anna meets up with the lady she's in Beckway when she meets the lady on the other boat, and she goes over to have dinner. And that's the other thing, is that people are so friendly and so willing to like tell you a lot about their lives. They're a very friendly, sociable bunch. So It's a little weird for me because I'm kind of introverted and that doesn't sound fun to me. But at the same time, I also don't want to be like, oh, there's that boat. We just want to stay away from them. They're kind of just, standoffish or whatever. So it's like I'm gonna have to step out of my comfort zone a little bit when we get to places too, like,
And you do things that I was not planning on telling this story, but I'm going to tell it because I think you'll appreciate this. Like, we were sailing in Seattle one time, and we actually had to go and help a boat that was clearly in distress, and because we were sailing with somebody who he is part of the unofficial, like he's a captain or whatever it is that like you're required by law to like help tow a boat in if they're in distress. And these people were like clearly on a lot of drugs, and like we were very afraid that they were gonna like jump on our boat and rob us. So we sort of like threw them a line and like towed them very far out and like swung them around. Like, and he like did this amazing like this docking for them where he was like, "Here's the Coast Guard, like here you go." Like we're weird stuff happens on the water, right? You got to
for sure.
Like I love it. And so on that same note, let's talk a little more about the journey that Anna and Keen take. One of our viewers and Mighty Blaze team members, Alex Hoops, was saying she's itching to go on vacation right now. I am itching to go on vacation right now. We are all itching to go on vacation right now. Like, this is the ultimate armchair vacation book. Like,
it really is
so awesome. It's so wanderlusty and wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about the actual journey that Anna and Keen take? Some of the islands we visit, you're so descriptive and so beautiful. How many of them have you actually been to so far? And if you haven't been there, what was the research process like for trying to learn?
Okay, so I have been to Grenada, Martinique, and a few of the islands in the Grenadines. So we went to the Tobago Keys where Anna snorkels with the turtles. We were there. There were places that I have wanted to go that I included in the book, like Montserrat is on the top of my want to go to list. So I sent her there because I want to go there. It's interesting because the hurricanes Irma and Maria hit while I was writing this book. So I had to make some changes because Dominica was one of all of the scenes that happened, all the important relationship scenes that happened in Martinique happened in Dominica originally. And I didn't feel comfortable after that island had gotten devastated being like, oh, hey, let's send them to an eco-tourist place and, having some romantic times when the island, was struggling to rebuild. So and then there were some places that I had written in, like a church on Jost Van Dyke is literally not in existence that, Keen goes to in the very beginning, in the first iteration of the book. And I was like, I can't ignore the hurricanes. You just can't. Those are those things. Like, we ignored the pandemic because do we really want that right now in our fiction? I don't know, maybe someday, but not now. I don't. But I couldn't ignore the hurricanes because it just felt really disrespectful to the people who live on the islands. So, like some of the places, I kind of just researched to each little place to see, is there anything interesting about this place? Is there anything interesting? So I just went through all of the islands trying to find like the ones that had something specific. And that's the thing about it's not that they don't all have their own flavor, but the activities for tourists are very similar on every island. So it's like we couldn't go to every island because it's like, oh, we went snorkeling again. Oh, we went to the beach again. Oh, we ate, lobster salad again, so it was like I had to find the places where something, something very important or significant or special happened. And so that's how I landed on the places that I landed. And Martinique became more of a, I don't know it became more exciting for me after I had been there because I just fell in love with that island. Like I fell in love so hard.
Oh, I love that. I'm so excited. And tell us a little bit about your plans for taking this trip, because you're going to take you're going to take Anna and Keen's trip, right?
We are. So my husband works in Bimini in the Bahamas.
Oh.
He runs some marinas on the island. And so he literally lives there right now. So eventually when the boat is ready, we'll probably take it to Bimini and leave it there while because he's planning to continue working for a while yet. And from there, that'll be our jumping off point. So we'll probably go to some of the islands that Anna and Keen went to. We've got some other ones. Like Anna's journey was literally about the destination. You know, when they say it's not the destination, it's the journey. Anna's original journey was the destination. She wanted to get it done. She wanted to do it. Like, I don't think that she was even like, I don't think when she started that she committed her heart to any of it. She just wanted to leave. And so, you know, like, we are going to take a much longer time and, you know, visit the places that she didn't go the first time and see, you know, like, we just love it. We love the culture. You know, each individual culture is different, but there's some general, you know, friendliness that happens in the islands that it's just, we just love it. So I'm looking forward to every place that every place. I want to go to every island.
Well, I hope your boat is big because I'm going to invite myself along. And I'm sure our viewers are going to invite themselves along as well. And we'll all, you know, tie up and make a little flotilla and have our sundowners. And hope you're looking forward to that.
I'm ready. I'm ready now.
I am not. I just told you I was an introvert and I don't want your company. Thank you very much. I love that. That's so great. Let's stop for a second. Let's go back to a little bit of crafty stuff. So it's first person, and it's also, you write in present tense. Is that something that you've always done? Is that kind of a stylistic thing for you, or is that a departure? And
no,
is there anything behind that?
No, mostly I write first person, present tense. My last YA novel was third person, just because I had two main characters and I was telling alternating voices, and I found that much easier. And I actually found it, even though it seems like it would be farther, it was actually brought them in a little closer. So I do want to experiment, but with this book and the two that follow, I'm kind of keeping in the same style. But I do feel pretty comfortable in first person, mainly just because I kind of put myself in that character's head. So I'm, you know, not to say that Anna is me, but I am her while I'm writing it. And so, you know, I'm trying to like she would think, and, you know, what would I do in this situation and how would I feel? And I mean, really, that's the way I write all my characters. My first main character was a Marine, and I have not ever been a man, and I have never been a Marine, but it was easy. It's not difficult to put yourself in that person and say, how would I feel? And, you know, things that are scary to a lot of people. Just making you a Marine doesn't necessarily make you less scared. It just, you know, you just have to handle it in a different way because that's your job. So
yeah. I love that. I love the idea that you are the character. I think so many people are always like, is this autobiographical? But I love that framing the thinking, like, the character is not me. I am the character as I write. That's really cool.
I almost feel like I'm a medium sort of channeling them for as long as they have to say what it is that they're trying to say. And then when they're done, we're kind of done, you know?
Besides Anna and Keen, who are both, actually, you know what? I want to ask about this because this is something I think is really important. Their relationship is so healthy. Like, this is, I so appreciate this because I am, you know, I love Sex and the City as much as anybody else, but I am tired of the trope in any sort of piece of fiction or a movie involving a relationship that is inherently toxic, that is the relationship. And I think that's a horrible story to tell women. And I so appreciate that this is a healthy relationship, and it's so sweet, and they're really there for each other. How do you, I sense from your nodding that this is an intentional thing on your part. I would love to hear your thoughts about that and about portraying healthy relationships and how you do that while also creating enough conflict to keep an interesting story, because it's a hard balance, right?
It really is. And I struggle with that, how to create the conflict. But I do think it's really important. I am tired of the alpha guy who is somehow changed and yet not changed by the main character. Like he's still a badass, but because she's won his love. I don't understand that. I don't get it. I want to get it, but I don't get it at all. I mean, for me, a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve and who is genuine and kind, sign me up. That's what I want. And all of the guys are in my all of the guys in this group of books are all that way. They are guys who are not, who are not uncomfortable, like being kind and being, and wanting a healthy relationship and wanting to be a team. Like, to me, like, that's how it should be. You should be a team.
Absolutely.
I think that the conflict has to be external. Like, I just, in case, I mean, it is sort of internal, but it's like, I didn't want Anna and Keen's relationship to be this misunderstanding that blows up in their faces. And I mean, you can say goodbye to someone and know that you may or may not see them ever again and still be in love with them. So, like, to me, that was like what I wanted. That was what I wanted to read. Like I said, I wanted to read that book. And so I wrote that book, and I want the guys to be guys that you can still be in love with, and you can be brokenhearted that you may never get to keep that thing that you found.
Yeah.
Like, that's to me, that's terrible. Like, that's a terrible thing to have to go through. You don't need to make it worse by, inserting a fight that could have just easily resolved with an apology.
Yeah. I know. I so appreciate that. And I'm not going to do any spoilers, but I so appreciate the things that Anna says to Keen at the end of the book. Like, this is empowerment, in my opinion, is shifting this narrative on what relationships are we really portraying? What stories are we telling women and young women and anyone? I mean, men too. Like, that's, at one point in the book, Anna says, like, why are you being so nice to me? And Keen says, how else would I be? And I just love that. Like, because it's so much truer to life. Rarely do we end up with the super toxic guy. And if we do, it usually ends somewhere along the line. Right. Like, that's just, so thank you for doing that, because I really appreciate that portrayal. And more books like this, more from
me.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about, you mentioned this series of books. I was going to ask this later, but since you mentioned it, let's just talk about it really briefly. Now you have plans to kind of do spin-offs. Can you talk a little bit about the one that you're working on right now? It's from the ground up, I think.
It's called The Sweet Spot. And it's like a hotel suite.
Ooh.
Rather than, like SWEET.
Yeah.
But the main character is Anna's sister, Rachel.
Excellent.
Who she comes across a little abrasive in Float Plan, and that's where I kind of was like, why is she like that? What's going on with her? In her own book, would she still be like that? And so, that's where I jumped into her. And in this particular story, she is working in a luxury hotel in Miami. She's been working there for quite a long time. It's her dream. Working in hotels is her dream. She would eventually someday like her own. She gets fired very suddenly and unjustly for something that happens. I don't want to give anything away about that one. It's a really terrible situation that she gets involved in. And so she ends up looking for a job at a brew hotel on an island in Lake Erie in Ohio. And when she takes the job and she gets there, she finds that none of it is exactly what she expected. Like, nothing is what she expected. But yeah, and the main character, or the love interest there, is he's a brewer. That's what he's done. He's mainly more about brewing than he is about hotel building. So he really is kind of in the weeds, and he needs her for more than one reason. And I kind of see it as almost an inverse float plan, whereas Rachel is actually sort of in the Keen situation, and her love interest needs her in a way that he doesn't understand. So yeah, and then the following book will be Anna's best friend Carla and Keen's brother Eamon. And
we're getting
a little bit more like, if I had to pitch it, my elevator pitch would be kind of like it's leap year, only with geographical correctness.
Right? That drive would have taken 3 hours.
Yeah. And when you get blown off course, you don't end up where you do. I mean, that one was just, I have a friend who she's like, I love that movie, but I get so mad at the geography. But yeah, he's tasked with picking her up at the airport for reasons. And so they decide like, well, we've got some time, let's get lost. So they kind of do. And I still don't know I don't actually know what the plot is yet. So
I love it. I can't wait to read all of these. So did those come out of, did you always kind of know I'm going to write spinoffs, or did Rachel so kind of capture your interest that you were like, I have to explore?
I actually have to give credit to my agent, because she's like, I could totally see this being like a series with Rachel as a character and maybe Sarah, which is one of the people they meet. And I was like, I don't feel like I have the depth to write Sarah. I mean, she's French, Algerian, British, and I am none of those things. So I'm like, I don't think I really feel like I could do that. But it started me thinking about who else. Well, Carla. Yeah, I could write Carla. And suddenly it like spun into this thing. I'm highly suggestible. I really am. Like, I don't even think my agent meant to do that. And suddenly I'm like, oh, yeah, I could. Like my original editor sent me a picture once and said, when you write your first adult novel, this could be the cover. And I was like, I'm not planning to write an adult novel. And then I did. So it's like, I'm highly suggestible.
I love that. You find inspiration everywhere. Why not? Right? Now let's just a couple more quick questions. We'll do a couple little crafty questions. But before we do that, I just want to remind everyone, Float Plan is out now, and please pick it up at your local indie or at bookshop.org, or we're going to give a shout out to Macintosh Books on Sanibel Island. Is that?
Yeah, that's them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have signed copies. So if you want a signed copy, definitely look them up.
Who doesn't want a signed copy? And please remember to follow Trish on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. You can be like me and creepy stalk her and go on her sailing adventures on Instagram with her, which will be fun for everyone. And you're going to get lots of random comments from me being like, hi, where are you? Can I meet up for a sundowner? And you're going to be like, I don't think so. This is weird. Please stop.
Just to let people know too, I have a Facebook page. I actually have a Facebook account, but I don't really follow people back there because it's really just my mom and other people. Oh, where did I go? There I am.
You disappeared. That's okay.
So, but you can like my Facebook page, and my page will have, updates on everything. And, I drop all the news in those 3 places first. So.
Awesome. Fabulous. Quick. So you mentioned that you are a person who writes from the beginning to the end. Are you a plotter, or is that just you just write and then you do outlines, or do you just kind of go with it?
I mainly kind of have an idea what the beginning and the middle and the end look like, but I kind of fly by the seat of my pants. I guess it would be more like a plantser, whereas I have written synopsises before, and then I deviate from that just wildly. But mostly I just know how it starts. I know kind of how it's going to get there, and I know how it ends. So I do spend a lot of time just letting things organically happen, because I don't know. My characters speak. And I think, it's kind of one of those things, if you talk to someone who's not a writer about how your characters kind of are living, speaking beings, they're like, you maybe need medication, Trish. And I'm like, no, if I had medication, they would stop talking.
And we don't want that. We want the characters to keep talking to us.
But yeah, I just kind of do. It's like I said, I kind of just channel them. They show up and tell me what they want to say, and I just sit down and listen. So
I love that so much. And do you have a favorite book? Do you have a book of all time, or do you have it can be maybe even like a childhood favorite or an adolescent favorite, and then maybe a contemporary favorite?
Oh,
I know it's hard. It's really hard to like.
The one I point to as a child. So when I was a little kid, my mom was a teacher, and I learned to read very young. And she wanted me to read this book of this series, and it's a very, very old series. It's B is for Betsy by Carolyn Hayward. And she wanted to read it, and I was like, no, I don't want to. So she read one chapter, and I'm like, read more. And she's like, no, if you want to read more, you have to read it yourself. So that was a formative one for me, because it like really kind of sparked me reading on my own. Yeah. But growing up, I was in a weird period that we didn't have YA. Like we had some silhouette romances that I devoured like candy. Like I had hundreds of them, but I was a teenager. Like I was in high school, so I was almost even a little too old for them, but I loved them. So, like The Outsiders was literally the YA novel when I was in middle school. Like that's it. Yes, I read Francine Pascal. I did. The Sweet Valley, but again, I was old for those because I was an older teenager by then. When I go back and look at my favorite books, oh God, it's hard. Like, which one is my favorite child? You know what? But I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, and honestly, I think my all-time favorite book is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman.
Cool.
Which is completely outside of the film in which I write. But he can't write a bad book. Like I just don't think he's capable of it. And that one I think I've read more than any other book. But another favorite of mine is Shotgun Love Songs by Nicholas Butler, which I cannot tell you why I love the book as much as I did, but I do. And I've read some of his other work that just doesn't hit me quite the same. He's super talented, but that book just spoke to me. And like I revisit that one pretty regularly too.
I love that. What is maybe either the best advice about writing that you've ever been given, or something you would tell a young writer coming up?
I've gotten from that question a lot from young writers, and really it's like it's so simplistic, but read everything and just keep writing. Like the only way you get better at writing is by reading. It really is by practice and by reading. And when you read something that someone is doing, like don't copy it, but use it as a springboard to improve your own writing. You see what works. You feel it. When a book makes you feel something, that's when you start just dissecting it and figuring out what it is that the writer did that like made you fall in love with it. I firmly am a believer in like taking your favorite book and ripping it apart in terms of like each chapter. What is it that they did? What did they do? Like it's been kind of my own MFA program. Like this is how I've learned how to be a better writer, is to just rip apart the books that I loved. You learn so much from that. But so down in Florida, I don't know that he's as well known across the rest of the country, but he's always a New York Times bestseller because Floridians adore him, is Randy Wayne White. And he writes the Doc Ford series. Yep. And he was in the bookstore once when I worked at Barnes & Noble, and I had been lamenting to him that my very first book that I had written, it got picked up by a publisher, and then it was dropped. And I was devastated. And when I was explaining to him that this had happened, and he just looked at me and he goes, if you sold one book, you can sell another book. And that really did help me, like in the moments where I was feeling like this is never going to sell. I was like, no, he's right. If you had what it took to sell one book, you're going to do it again. So thank you, Randy.
Thanks, Randy. That's great advice. That really is great advice for everyone. If you can sell one book, you can sell another one. And I think it probably spills over into, if you can write one book, you can write another one. If
Exactly.
you can, if you can write one chapter, you can write another one. If you can write one
Exactly.
sentence, you can write another one. You bring it down to that level. Trish, you're amazing. Once again, we just want to congratulate you on Float Plan. It's so fun. It's so gorgeous. Quick before you go, what's one book other than Float Plan that you're looking forward to reading next?
Oh gosh, this is always a tough question too. Like, I wish I had my Kindle in front of me.
Yeah, right.
Right now, I am, and I can't even remember what I'm reading. This is terrible. Why do you ask me these questions?
I'm sorry. You can say the newspaper.
I know. I'm like, I'm like looking at my bookshelf right now.
This is the moment when you're like, I forget what are books called, right? Like, what are books called, right? What's the name of
it?
It
is when I'm writing, I'm not reading, and then I binge read a whole bunch of stuff after I finished a project, and I'm reading something right now. A Summer to Remember by Erica Montgomery.
Summer to Remember
is on my top of my to read list. And it sounds amazing. It also has a sailor in it, so I'm all kind of like super excited. Anything that's got sailors in it, I'm like, sign me up.
Same, ditto. We can start sailor fiction.
One that I've already had a little bit of a sneak peek of that's coming up that I would recommend is Love Lists and Fancy Ships.
Ooh, that sounds good.
A little bit more like Below Decks kind of, that kind of vibe on a big yacht, but it's so good. It's so good. It also has like the element of grief, like grief in boats and hot guys. That all works for me.
Like the Melville quote of like, when you want to knock people's hats off, you take to the sea. There's something about it. You got, when we're all upset, and obviously the Isak Dinesen quote, the cure for everything is salt water. And that's the, I think we've learned that certainly for Anna and for Keen, it is in Float Plan. And it's been so fantastic talking to you today, Trish. Congratulations again on Float Plan. Everyone, thank you for joining us on Lit Chick here on A Mighty Blaze. I'm Jenna Paone. Thank you to our producer, Julie Gerstenblatt, who has been monitoring our socials all day and chatting with you all. Thank you, Trish, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And everyone, say hi to Trish, follow her and stalk her, just like I'm going to. And we'll all be joining you on the open seas, hopefully soon. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you guys next week. We'll have another great author. Thank you